customer knowledge, I think, is the biggest thing to be able to deploy it effectively. So I love it. Like, yeah, I'm not running it. Great. But we're still killing it. You can still get results without doing ABM.
Let's get started. So I think when building audiences, some people tend to just jump right into building, the audience in LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever tool that you're using. And oftentimes I feel like that's jumping ahead too quickly. So what I'd love to do is get your perspective, Sidney, on, before you build an audience, how do you start to understand your customers? Like, what's your process? Where do you start from?
Yeah, I've done this internally and, at Refine Labs as well. When typically you have like some sort of persona sheet or something from product marketing that gives you like some sort of ICP, ideal customer profile. And that's kind of a starting point, but I also feel like it's really not enough. It's normally pretty vague or pretty, maybe only one or two teams have had input into it. So I like to take that, understand what we think we should be targeting, but I also like to jump into Salesforce and run reports on close won and close lost, and to see if there's any differences that's not matching up with, maybe some of the documentation that we have for ideal customer profiles or personas. So that's one thing that I really like to do. And then the second thing before I even think about going in platform is understanding the product. So if I'm not working in-house, I get a full demo, I chat with their sales team. I really want to understand from their perspective, who do they want to be talking to and who's closing in the Salesforce data, but more qualitative data from them. And then kind of take all three of those things to then kind of recreate our audience targeting plan. And again, it's a starting point. It's never set it and forget it. So it's a starting point is what I'll say for launches for sure.
I hear you. I love the set it and forget it. I think I was what was it? Ron Co. The bad infomercials from the 90s. Hana, how do you go about this? Where do you get started?
Yeah, well, I think Sidney kind of hit the nail on the head for sure, but I sort of think of it in three different buckets. And Sidney, you covered these pretty well. It's really like what you think would be that persona doc. Like, I think our customer looks like this. I think our ICP should, contain these criteria. And to Sidney's point, that should really be developed alongside your teams. So like with sales, with marketing, with product, with customer success even, because then you're getting that 360 view into not only the product, and the intentions of it, but also what's actually happening and what we want to happen versus what we just think will happen. So what you think, and then what they say. So looking to your customers, your actual customers, your audience that you can validate with, and listen to those sales calls, listen to the calls that went well, the calls that went badly, and listen to them full funnel. So from the early sales discovery calls all the way through customer success, and what does a really, really good engagement look like? What do they say about us? How are we solving their problems? What are their pain points? Because that's exactly what we want to replicate in most cases, or avoid. If you're like, wow, this is, red flags everywhere here, this is what we don't want to see. And then to Cindy's point, what your data says. So doing an opportunity analysis, looking at, what's in Salesforce, what has converted and why, what are those attributes. So that's kind of the lens that I look at it through. So very similar to Sydney's approach as well.
You gotta love it when you're listening to those sales calls and you're like, oh my gosh, they really said that.
That should be another session. That should be a therapy session. But keep going, Maurice.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with all those points. Like I think my very first thing that I like to do is I'd love to just hear what people are saying. What are their pain points? What's the problem that they need that we're solving? Really just digging into how they're interacting with people down the line, because we can get leads in anytime. I think the nurture process is and lower funnel activities is where I like to start, just because that's what I'm going to be tied to, So I think that's looking at those lower funnel like opportunities, looking at sales calls from top of funnel to bottom. That's where I like to get started.
I promise that was not a planted answer, because the whole theme of this event is getting closer to revenue. So that was perfect, Maurice. Awesome. So you've got that baseline understanding, Maurice. Now, once you've got that, how do you actually get started? What different data sources are you using? Walk me through that.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, when I get started, I'm the type of person who is in the channels digging into all the data. I like to look at, everywhere from my process is looking at, all right, what's the people who are interacting with the business, people who like retargeting audiences, looking at how they're interacting with the channel already. Looking at your ICP targeting, we talked about that before, but how are they interacting with how they are interacting on Facebook, what are they doing on LinkedIn, like and in terms of like search types things, like what are really just digging into the platforms, looking to see, are we hitting those people, are we getting correct touches on the right businesses, are we aligned that way in terms of marketing? I find a lot of times like we don't want to target this company with 2 people, we don't want to spend, and granted that's some businesses, that's the bread and butter for the businesses I'm at, just making sure they're aligned. But getting started, I look at retargeting, ICP targeting, and your target account lists and ABM type plays.
Hana, what about you? And let's try not to jump into ABM versus ICP targeting, because we're going to have like 4 questions on that. So not trying to steal your thunder.
Yeah, no problem. I'm not ready to get into that violence yet. Mark wanted violence for this.
I did not say that. Yes.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I think starting with the problem is really important when we say, okay, we know who our audience is or who it could be, but we still have to understand that like just because you have something to say to that audience doesn't mean that everybody's going to care. Like, yes, you have your large ICP, but we still have to think within that, who has this specific problem? And if they have it, is it different between this subset and this subset? So understanding the differences across your ICP and who cares about the problem, in what way and why, and how are whatever we're putting out there, how is that solving their problem? So that's going to help us understand, wow, it really doesn't make sense for us with this message, with this offering to approach the audience in this way. So that will really help kind of determine those different subsets. And then when we're thinking about jumping into like actually operationalizing this, we can think through, what are the criteria that makes these people different? What are the criteria between the people who have the problem and care in a different way versus the people who have the problem and care, maybe at more of an executive level? So what is the difference between those two? And that will allow us to then see the more technical, like data-driven side of it, to be able to start building those types of lists and segmentation.
I love that. Now, Sidney, without giving away the secret sauce from Refine, you're probably going to bring a pretty interesting perspective here, just knowing that you work at an agency. So how would you go about this?
I actually look at it a little bit differently, shocker. But I kind of go bottoms up. So, right, like if we think about create demand and capture demand, I start with capture demand. That's the easiest, like kind of rinse and repeat. People who are already coming to your website, retargeting, things like those are kind of standard audiences where I actually spend the majority of my time fine tuning and we'll build like tons of different audiences and see, using metadata or using like in platform or using like another targeting tool if the customer has, certain technology. So that's really where I spend a lot of my time is ICP, and how within that, how, we don't want to go too wide and just waste a bunch of money. We need to validate our audiences before we scale. And then, more targeted audiences. But in terms of like kind of what you were saying around like mapping that operationally to the problems that they might have, I like to have kind of two different approaches. One, I like to run content that is more like product-based that would have a high reach. Like this is a core problem that 80% of our ICP has or experiences on their team maybe. And so that's kind of covering a larger majority of our audiences. And then we can dig into specific maybe features, maybe thought leadership content that's like a little bit more targeted towards persona, something like that, and start then sliding that in. And obviously we do, larger ICP and then also ABM type of stuff. I feel like I should have worn my ABM isn't shirt for this.
We probably are going to be sending some of those out after the event, so we'll make sure you get one of those.
Yeah, but generally that's how I look at it, and that's where a majority of my time is getting new people into the brand. So not even necessarily onto the website, but getting new people to understand the brand and what problems that you solve.
So you mentioned something that I want to jump into next. You mentioned scaling, and I would love to understand how each of you approach testing audiences before you scale them and what exactly you're looking for. So Sidney, maybe we'll get started with you and run it back.
Yeah. I like to start very targeted. I like to start as targeted as I can to prove out that core audience. And then we can start maybe scaling that a little wider. Wider could be in terms of geographies. It could be in terms of like titles, like, okay, we're going to start at director and VP, or we're going to start at like our number one buyer. And I always start with job title targeting first. And then depending on the product and depending on the reach of the problems that it solves, we could potentially scale it if they have, something like a sauna or something, right? Like almost everyone can use something like that, right? We could scale, but that's not every product. So that's where I like to start. And then how I monitor if it's working and when we should scale is based, because we don't have a lot of wide audiences running at once. We start targeted, and then I look at all of the demo conversions coming in. I get emails on every single form fill into my inbox, so I can see real time, are these the right titles that I'm targeting, right? Because we're not going to have a lot of direct attribution. That's a whole nother topic we could have a panel on. We're not going to have a lot of direct attribution, especially on social. So we need to correlate that with what's actually coming in, maybe through organic and direct. So if I see the right titles coming in, exactly who we are targeting, I feel confident to either scale up budget, scale out the audience size, or like geos or something like that.
I love that. There was a lot of gold in there. Hana, how do you tackle this?
Yeah, I would even go one step before that if you have the time and the space to do so, because we know a lot of people don't. It starts small for sure, which I know Sidney was saying as well. And looking for that validation, I think, is really critical. So especially if it's a new, not only a new audience, but a new offering or a new, anything new that you're trying that isn't the market, it's not in the market yet. So really validate internally first, and then even go to people like advisors, leverage those relationships that you have, especially if you're at a startup. Like, those are such powerful relationships where that's what they're there for. They're meant to help you work through these problems and share their experience and share their, if they are your target market, like a lot of our advisors are at that CMO level, and they have that experience. So when we're trying to figure out a new audience, they're the first ones that we want to go and ask, does this look right to you? Are we talking about a problem that you would actually, be interested in? And is this something that you can validate for us? And then even look towards your customers as well and try to gain some validation there. Like, I know that we worked through this problem last quarter. Would this be something that you would be interested in? Do you feel others in the space would be interested in? And then, so you kind of can work your way out in terms of scaling. And then you can go to even thought leaders. So like when we started Marketing Ops Confessions, we kind of went through this process, and then we got to thought leaders and started talking to thought leaders and say, hey, you're in this space, you're the expert, like, you tell us, is this something that you're interested in? Do we expand the audience here? Do we keep it to just marketing ops? So you get that really relevant and kind of like unsolicited advice there too. And then, as Sidney was saying, you can move out a little bit broader, but really focus for that MVP, like just put something out there and start with that main audience and then look for ways to grow it. And that's kind of the process that, like I said, we followed with Marketing Ops Confessions.
I got a question.
Love that.
For you, Sidney, real quick. You said you get all your demos go to your email. How many emails do you have in your inbox right now?
That's a great question. Well, hopefully every month that they're growing, I get more and more emails is the goal.
I just think that, like, oh my gosh, my inbox would be huge.
I've got routing rules, but it is super helpful to, if I push budget into a channel for a certain client and like that day or the next day, I start seeing instant growth of what we normally see, that gives me confidence to keep investing or keep, changing stuff up. So yeah, it's Outlook or Gmail's got some auto rules and folders to make it a little bit better. I'd say smalls could be relative too. Like, yeah. I might say 50,000 is small, and another company might say, whoa, 20,000 or 10,000 is small. Like, so I totally hear you, Maurice, and I agree. Small versus large depends on budget, and it also kind of probably depends on your total addressable market as well.
So you mentioned something that comes up a lot for our own prospects and new customers, which is audience size, and educating them on, hey, you think you're only going after a very, very small number of accounts, and that may work for some businesses, but oftentimes you have to build larger audiences. So Hana, like, how do you build, larger audiences that still make sense for MadKudu without, just broadcasting to everyone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is tricky. And I would say that, like, sometimes it can feel really difficult to do that without technology. I'm obviously a little bit biased and have the privilege of using our own tools. So when we're thinking about like, what other audience could we tack onto this to broaden it out, we're able to segment. Well, first of all, we're able to kind of like reveal a lot of folks that are coming to our website. And so we know that there's some sort of engagement there. We know where they fall in terms of our ICP and if they're a good fit or not. So I think it's really critical that if you can leverage that information around, are the people coming to our site a good fit versus is everyone just coming to our site and should we just kind of like throw them into a lookalike campaign? So it's really important for us to really narrow in on the good fits and the very good fits, for example. So that allows us to take the audience that, say, we're feeling confident about, but it's not big enough, and then layer in some of the things that are like, okay, we may not know who these people are, but we know the account and we know that they're active. We know that they're a good fit. We know that they're engaged at some level. So while we don't have, necessarily all of the criteria to do like, a very one-to-one campaign, we can still figure out different layering criteria to then expand that audience and reach them, whether it's just knowing that account name and what our buying group looks like, knowing that account name and their title, things like that. So that's kind of how we approach that scenario in blowing up an audience when we need to, because we know some of these tools, you have to have that larger size. And I don't think it's necessarily bad to have a smaller audience. LinkedIn will wag their finger at you and say, your audience size is too small. Yes, that is fine if you know what the implications are. You know that it's going to be more expensive. You know that it's going to, and that's like the number one thing, like the cost driver, right? But if you have the right people, and that is truly who you want to be reaching, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you understand, again, what that looks like from, a cost per click perspective, an acquisition perspective, and so on and so forth.
So you mentioned implications. Sidney, what are some of those implications of, targeting smaller audiences that people might not be aware of?
Well, I think you hit one on the head there was, CPMs and your CPCs are going to be higher. Don't freak out. It's okay. That's, you're paying, you pay a premium to target that way. And, depending on the platform you are on, it might depend, your reach is going to maybe look a little bit different. Like even I like to look at, okay, what does the platform say my audience size is? And then based on my budget per month, what percent of my reach am I getting in that total audience? And you're never going to get 100% because not everybody's online and an active user that could be served. But the nice thing about that I see a lot of times is when we go into smaller audiences or subsets, we might have a larger ICP audience and we have a couple of subset, like very specific audiences that we may want to tailor messaging to, or we just want to observe the metrics in platform compared to the larger one. So cost is one, but if your messaging is tailored, which it should be if you're going to spend a premium to reach those people, you should see higher engagement. So it's worth the extra upcharge, in my opinion, if you're reaching the right people with a more tailored message, maybe than your broader campaigns. And you kind of have to let the data tell you a little bit here. And it's a little bit of, there's no black, white, this is working, this is not. You kind of have to give it your gut instinct. But those are like the two main things. And then you're going to have to ramp up your creative faster, and you're going to need to have the resources in place to do that, to not fatigue your audience. It's going to be smaller. You'll likely get a higher percentage of reach within that audience compared to your larger audience of like 100,000 people. You might get like 50,000 reach or something, depending on your budget. If it's 40,000 people, you might get a higher than a 50% on that audience, but it's going to cost more, and you're going to have to rotate the either campaign frequency or like actual creative as well. So not only just the content that you're running, but the creative within the content to make sure that you can not exhaust that smaller audience. So those are the two main things.
Something that people often forget about. Maurice, what about you guys at LaunchDarkly?
Yeah, we have a mix of small and large audiences. I definitely think that the creative part, making sure that your audiences aren't getting the same ad for 6 months, that's a really good way to make sure a campaign does really badly. But like Sidney said, really making sure that you have a wide breadth of creative that's really good for these audiences, and can really help performance, just because like with these small audiences, if you aren't top of mind for them, it's not gonna prove well for you. I always think it's funny when we do use small audiences, like my like all the alarms go off. I'm like, oh my gosh, my cost per click is twice as much. But I'm like, all right, if we're tied to revenue, this doesn't matter. Like if my cost per lead is 2x, 3x what it's supposed to be, but down the line they're going to close for $50,000, I'm okay paying that. And I think it's hard to get that mindset, because as marketers, depending where you're started, where you've been, certain businesses who aren't tied to marketing, people who aren't tied to revenue, that's like the greatest sin. And so reframing your mind for dealing with small audiences, knowing what's going to happen going into it will help you, first help you with your performance, second help you with everything going through the funnel.
That's a great way to look at it. So, all right, here comes the violence. Maurice, I see your football jersey in the background. I don't know if your shoulder pads are laying around, but we're going to talk through intent data first, and then we're going to get into ABM and demand gen targeting. So intent data. I think intent data oftentimes gets confused with, fixing all of your targeting issues. You still have to know what to do with that intent data. So over at LaunchDarkly, are you using intent data right now, and how are you using it?
Yeah, we use intent data. We get intent data from a couple different sources. Obviously we use metadata to help us with this, because you guys do a great job, but we use
no pitch slapping.
Isn't this a pitch slap, the whole thing? But we use some different intent sources like G2, when people are looking at us versus some other competitors to solve a feature flagging, the product that we offer, solution. And that really helps us, because we can pipe that into who's interested, and then we can, those are typically smaller audiences, and so the tactics that we just talked about, and strategies, we can use those to get those people to be top of mind when they're, when they go to a search program and type in, I want to buy this. So yeah, we use quite a few of them, and they really help, because we can move really fast with them, because we know what their awareness level is. So they're pretty good.
Hana, what about you? Are you using intent data sources right now at MadKudu?
We do, but what I'll say is that we prefer to think of everything in terms of proximity to revenue. So if we can kind of think of that as like a sphere, we're going to focus on first party intent for sure, always. Like anytime we can see that, first of all, there's hand raisers, right? Like these are the people that absolutely get the first, all of the attention. And then we can go to the next layer out, which might be just engagement, right? We have inbound leads, they're showing some sort of engagement. And then we can move out to like anonymous website visitors. So we're trying to leverage as much as we can that we have just knowing who they are, what they're doing on our website, what they're doing in our product, those statistically relevant activities that are 100% going to contribute to them moving forward in the funnel, because that's where we want to spend the most of our energy. It's more of a sure bet than leveraging that outer layer of intent, which could mean a lot of different things. Just because you have intent does not mean that you're ready to buy. I search for things all the time, doesn't mean I'm looking for that technology, or that I'm looking to move places or go on a vacation or whatever it may be. So we try to, when we're using intent, we always try to tie it to those inner, spheres, instead of just solely relying on intent. And I would say too, as much as you can, leverage things like what technology are they using, or are they hiring? So like those kinds of intent pieces of intent are a little bit more indicative to us, at least, and in knowing when a company is going to scale, knowing when a company is going to invest in more technology, because that might mean that they have budget. That might mean that their headcount is indicating growth, and we have an opportunity to be a part of that growth. So that's kind of how we view intent. And yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said about the intent data industry and some of the false narratives around, just like a lot of it is just sort of made up, honestly. But if you compare it with those inner circles of this is legit data, this is how people are engaging, that's when it can become powerful.
So I agreed with everything that you said, except the vacation part, because I constantly look at vacations I shouldn't be looking at. Sidney, what about you? How are you using intent data for your clients?
A couple of different ways. It really depends on, the client's tech stack and what they already invested in or have planned to invest in. We definitely don't push anything like that. Intent in general, I would say it's kind of like a nice to have, and it's 100% not a need to have. We have a ton of clients that have no intent solutions, no intent integrations, and they're still getting amazing results. So there's just a PSA for everybody out there who's not.
I agree with it. I wish more people understood that too.
So, but we do, I would say, how I like to use intent is when we're looking to go into new audiences and we don't want to maybe take the wide approach, we can push some of those audiences of intent data in if a customer has that. The reason why we don't lean into it too much, like if they have the tech, we're going to use it, of course. Of course I want to upbid on Google Ads if you're in a predictive model segment. Why wouldn't you want to do that, right?
Let's get into ABM and demand gen targeting. So we're big believers of ABM being something that you do and not necessarily something that you buy. So Hana, are you running any account-based campaigns right now? And how do you target, using accounts versus your ICP?
Yeah, and I would say we have done very specific ABM campaigns, but I would say the way that we approach ABM today is it's a layered effort on top of demand generation. And I will die on this hill. Demand generation is what powers everything in your funnel, top to bottom. It is not one, it is the lightning strike that goes all the way through. ABM sits in different areas of the funnel as well. So I think that ABM is a component of demand gen. I think that ABM is also not just bottom of funnel. A lot of people think of ABM as okay, it's sales and marketing alignment. It is pushing things across the line, pushing these accounts to sale, but there's still a targeting and an acquisition component to that. So that's kind of my preface before diving into what we do is we have a layered approach to our demand gen. And then within that, we say, okay, we have this broad strategy. So for marketing ops confessions, for example, we have, we're targeting the marketing ops audience and community as a whole with a couple of different goals there, obviously trying to amplify the voices within the community and build relationships. But that's fairly broad, right? So on top of that, we also have a strategy within that same program to attack certain accounts. And I don't like that word attack, build relationships with certain accounts.
You said violence 20 minutes ago. Yeah.
Yes, I chose violence again. So building relationships with certain accounts within these same efforts. So we have this broad approach, but then our more targeted ABM approach might be, we have 10 accounts this quarter, and we want 5 of them to be guests on Marketing Ops Confessions. And that's how we're going to start building relationships with them. That's how we're going to start, hearing them and listening to what their pain points are, what they care about. And that then allows us to have the data to, again, build out that relationship and see where they fit in our funnel, and then put them into other various campaigns, whether it be one-to-one with our sales, or we even do like a lot of like one-off, like one account, here's what we're going to do with this one account. So that's kind of how we approach ABM as a whole. And yes, I feel very passionate about the demand gen mega cloud that fuels the funnel.
I will die on that hill with you, so you have company.
Good.
Sidney, how are you approaching ABM targeting versus demand gen targeting?
Yeah, I think they're like targeting wise, it's very similar. You're just kind of using an account list on top. What similar how we might do, you know, an ICP, like larger campaign, and then have like subsections under that. That's how I looked at ABM. So you should hopefully have your accounts tiered. You should have them segmented in some way, ideally segmented in a somewhat unique way to your business. Not just like, well, there's these countries and this revenue, you know, that's what everybody's doing. And you could probably create a lot better approach and content strategy and deployment if you thought about segmentation a little bit differently. And that's kind of on the strategy side. So we like to work with clients saying, okay, you have this account list. This is what you want. ABM is not just running paid ads at these different lists. So you should have a strategy for your different groupings or your tiers, however you want to work with that internally. But your top 50 accounts, we can do some paid campaigns, but it's going to be probably heavily non-paid and very organic and very involving with like more one-to-one and a sales outreach, maybe field marketing, compared to maybe your other larger lists. And one thing, as you start segmenting down, even with your ICP list, but even more with your account base, right? You need to have the content engine and the design engine flywheel to support that. Because if you're just running the same exact content with maybe slightly different creatives, I feel like there could probably be just put them all in the same audience then, right? Like the whole point of breaking them out into separate audiences is to maybe test different messaging, test different pain points that account or tier of accounts might have compared to others. And it translates in the same way for your ICP. So that's why I kind of see them very similar in like structure and approach and how we might deploy. But what we might deploy and how we work on that organic strategy with paid, with events, it's got to be all one together. Like I said, you're not just going to get there with running social campaigns and, who knows, maybe you're doing display or something. I don't know.
Let's not mention the D word. Yeah. Maurice, how does that approach compare to what you guys are doing at LaunchDarkly?
So to be quite honest, and I don't want to be here, we don't actually do very much ABM.
This is a safe space.
Yeah, we run demand. And so like we have segments and we run some different plays with, maybe we have like a hospitality, like insurance, something like a bunch of different segments, but for the most part, ABM can be difficult, because you want to give them the handheld approach, take them all the way through with sales, but sometimes it can be expensive, it can be hard, it can be really, really time consuming. That's something that we're building out, but it's at LaunchDarkly, it's been I've only been at LaunchDarkly for a little bit, and we are getting things in motion to be able to do ABM, but as of right this moment, we are focusing on demand because it's more profitable for us.
Maurice, I would say a lot of people are not doing ABM, even if they think they're doing ABM. Most people are doing targeted demand gen, not ABM, which is fine. And that's okay. Like, it's not bad if you're not doing ABM. And if we think about ABM too, and our co-founder talks about this all the time, it's like, it's really a rebranding of like enterprise sales and marketing's taking more of that. So true ABM is like a subset of accounts, and you are actually diving into their business, and you have a use case, you have a value proposition that is extremely unique to that business. And that might be 10 accounts, that might be 20 accounts. So you are so intimate with what their pain points are, who that buying group is, and all of that. And you are customizing the heck out of a lot of different assets and your messaging. And I believe that that is true ABM, and a lot of companies are not there yet. A lot of enterprise sales teams are doing that because that's truly what it is, but a lot of marketing teams are not there.
Yeah, and for that those reasons specifically is why, like, we like the motto, move fast and find your dependencies. And if we were to implement that, we would have more dependencies than we would like to find out. So we stick with demand gen because it works.
And I would just echo it. It's okay. I feel like people feel pressure to be like, oh, are you doing ABM? They're like, oh yeah, of course we're doing ABM. Of course. Why wouldn't we be? It's kind of this thing. And to your point, I love that you just like, no, we're not. And this is why we're not. That's not the approach we're taking. That's not the strategy. I think you as a leader and your company, that's how you should be. You should be saying something like that if you're not ready for that, or that's not the strategy that you want to deploy. Like I said, you have to have the content resources. You have to have the creative resources. You have to have the actual customer knowledge, I think, is the biggest thing to be able to deploy it effectively. So I love it. Like, yeah, I'm not running it. Great. But we're still killing it. You can still get results without doing ABM. Okay, I'm done.
Can I say one more thing about?
Yes, I love it.
I was going to say, not to mention, just to piggyback off of the requirements that Sidney's talking about, is that you also have to, and when I was agency side, we had so many people, I want to do ABM, we want to do ABM. And we say, okay, let's do a readiness assessment here. Their data is a mess. They don't have the necessary tooling or resources to get things in a place where you can even approach building your target account list. And so you have to do that readiness assessment of like, yes, we know you want to do ABM, but can you even operationalize it? What does ABM mean to you? What does your data look like currently? Where are the gaps? Do we need technology? I will say you can do ABM without technology. Very much in alignment with it is something that you do. It is not something that you buy, but sometimes you do need that add of, tech component to kind of help operationalize things, depending on the gaps. So I think that there are a lot of more technical related things when it comes to operationalizing ABM that a lot of people aren't thinking about upfront. Strategy first always, but when we start to think about, okay, how is this going to work? We often found that a strategy that we would build, we couldn't, in some cases, even put that into motion without doing that readiness assessment up front, because we get to this point and we're like, all right, we're ready to build this out. Let's enrich the database. Let's build an MQA model. And we couldn't do it. So I think that that's something just to be cognizant of when approaching ABM.
I'm not trying to poach any of you, but if any of you need a part-time job as like a hype man or hype woman, we will hire you for that reason. Thank you for all of that. That was gold. So we are just coming up here on time. This was awesome. This was fun, really informative. Thank you all for joining us. And this is great.